What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more iOS 18 features and changes. We're going to talk about why Apple Intelligence might have a paid subscription, some fresh iPhone 16 details, Apple's new product category is coming soon, a crazy AirTag story, and much more. And if you want to stay informed with everything going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and check out the Apple Den newsletter. All right, so let's start with even more iOS 18 features and changes. So we are currently still on beta 2, so we should be seeing beta 3 next week. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let's talk about some of these additional features and changes I've noticed. So first off, the first one is inside of the wallet application, and if you have an Apple Card and you go to your week, month, or year view, you can see that the spending, when it shows your total spending right there, it shows an up or down arrow and shows below that how much more or less you spent at the same time last week, last month, last year, but it also expands down here in the categories. So it will also now show you if you've spent more or less in specific categories and how much more or less. So for example, for services, it shows this week I've spent $169 more than the previous week in terms of services. And if we go to the month view, you can see that we've spent a lot less money this month. And if you go down to the services, you can see the breakdown by how much more or less I've spent on each category in this month view. So this is awesome. We had before where it just showed, if you spent more or less in the month, but it was never broken down into categories like this on iOS 17. So this is a nice and welcomed change. Also new in iOS 18 beta 2 is that RCS now supports company profiles. So if you get a text message from somebody like Microsoft in this example, you can see that it now has RCS support. You can see, the photo, the profile photo for that company, and it says the company name, and it can also be verified by Apple. So if you watched last week's Apple Weekly episode, you would know that there's a new change to how the math notes work. So if you start drawing out and then you put the equal sign, it will not show you the solution by default. It will not show the solution right away. It's going to prompt you to solve first. So that is just the default action. So if you press on solve, it will then show the answer. However, if you go up to the three dots up in the top right, you'll see a section here, a new toggle for math results. And from here, you now have options. So you can insert results, which was the default in beta 1, suggest results, which is the default in beta 2, or you can turn math notes off completely straight from the notes application. So that is a new menu up there. And, a lot of people were upset that they didn't get the instant result or the insert results option by default, but you can go in here and change that if you would like. So now if I were to type that out, so if I just put 1 times 1 equals, you will see that it will give me the result right away. Another big feature in iOS 18 beta 2 is the ability to take over somebody's device when you are screen sharing in a FaceTime call. So if you go to a FaceTime call and you share your screen, before you could only view the other person's screen. But now with iOS 18 beta 2, if you screen share with another iOS 18 beta 2 or later user, you're now able to not only draw on their screen. So if you wanted to point something out without taking control of their device, you can draw on their screen, or you could also press this button down here in the bottom right, and this will allow you to basically control the other person's phone. And that other person will get this prompt right here that says, so-and-so wants to control your phone. You can press to allow or not allow. So the other person has to give you consent before you can do it. And then once you press allow, the other person can control your phone from their phone, which is pretty awesome. And this is honestly a game changer if you have grandparents who always contact you for technical support. And it actually works pretty well because the bottom bar that you would swipe up to go to the home screen is above the actual bottom bar on your device. You're not going to accidentally go out of FaceTime on your device when you're controlling the other person's phone because it's all within its own screen, and it will actually make you zoom out just so you don't, accidentally control your own device when you're trying to control the other person's device. I know it's kind of a lot, but it's an awesome feature. You should try it if you have somebody else that you know on iOS 18 beta 2. Now we also got the screen mirroring feature on macOS Sequoia beta 2 and iOS 18 beta 2, and I've found this to be a lot more useful than I expected. So this is great if you want to get notifications on your Mac. So for instance, if you got a notification on Snapchat on your iPhone, it would now show up on your Mac. So I've noticed that when I have this enabled and I always have my screen or at least the notifications on my Mac, I pick up my phone a lot less often. I don't feel like I'm missing out out on anything because I get my notifications right there in the top right like I do for my regular Mac notifications. And it's also great for just pulling up applications like Snapchat or Instagram, whatever applications you don't have on the Mac. It's really nice to be able to pull those up, on one screen while you're working, and you don't have to pick up a whole nother device and get distracted. So I think the screen mirroring feature is a big deal, and I've been loving it. It's actually really smooth so far. This is the first time we've seen it here in beta 2, and it's running a lot smoother than I anticipated. Also new in beta 2, if you go into the passwords application, the new default passwords app from Apple, we now have a plus icon in the bottom right hand corner, which is going to allow you to create a new password, and it's going to have a pre-filled password there. You just have to put in the website and the username, and that will create that password for you. Or if you just wanted a quick way to get a password, you can do that right there. And speaking of passwords, if you go into your settings and go to general and then down here to autofill and passwords, you'll notice that under the autofill from, the password section now has the updated glyph for the app icon. So before in beta 1, it was just that classic black and gray password icon, but now it shows up as the actual passwords app icon. Same down here where it says set up codes in password. So that is now an option down there as well. And while we're in the settings, I never mentioned this in my what's new video, but if you go into your settings and go to Siri and then go down here to Siri responses, down here at the bottom, we have when connected to car Bluetooth. So if you're connected to your car's Bluetooth or CarPlay, whatever the case may be, you now have the option for Siri responses to respond over the radio, over media source, or over phone speakers. And then I did also want to mention something I've been noticing a lot lately, but I just never got a chance to mention it. And that is that when you're on your AirPods or when you're on a phone call, you'll notice that there's now an option for auto when it comes to voice isolation. If you want to have it on wide spectrum, there's now an option for auto where it will automatically choose, which mode it thinks that you belong in. So when I talk to people about this and I ask them, what do I sound like? It seems like it defaults to voice isolation anytime you are outdoors or in like a supermarket or anything like that, in a store where other people are behind you. So it seems to work pretty well, at least according to the people I've talked to and asked for, their feedback on how I sound in auto mode. So definitely something new that you should try out. Now, as far as bugs go, I will say that I'm still having a few bugs here and there, but really nothing major in beta 2. I have noticed that the consistent issue I'm having every single day since I installed beta 2 is with HomeKit devices. So that is both on my phone, on iOS 18 beta 2, and especially on watchOS 11 beta 2. It broke everything on my watch on watchOS 11 beta 2. I was not able to control my lights, my locks, my garage doors, anything from my watch. It just completely reset everything for some reason, and it's still not working properly even after I did that. But it's also affecting iOS 18 beta 2 as well, especially when I put my phone up to unlock my lock on my front door. It's not working properly, whereas it was working fine in beta 1. So beta 2 really messed up HomeKit for me. I'm not sure if that's just me, but that is an issue I've been noticing. Also, I'm having issues with the control center still. It's just jittery sometimes. Sometimes it'll move an application even though I'm not trying to move it. I'm just trying to change screens. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the control center, but I will say it is better, again, than beta 1 at least. But as far as any other bugs go, I mentioned a few that I had last week. I'm still having those this week as well, but they were nothing major. And again, this is a beta software. I understand that, but the reason I say it in these videos is because sometimes Apple, watches these videos. Apple employees watch these videos and they can learn about some of the issues, even if other users are not reporting it in the feedback application. But just know it is important to make sure to report all of your bugs in the feedback application if you encounter them. Now, here's something very strange with iOS 18 beta 2. I've not scored a single good score in Geekbench. So I don't know what it is about iOS 18 beta 2, but ever since my first run, you can see I've done multiple runs here. I've done 3 runs on iOS 18 beta 2 starting at June 24th, and I've not gotten a single multi-core score over 7,000, whereas I always got over 7,000 on every other version, including iOS 18 beta 1. So here was my latest score. I actually just did this today, I believe. So yeah, not a great score. 2806 on the single core, 6830 on the multi-core. So not very strong in terms of Geekbench results, but to me, it feels more stable and more fluid than beta 1. That's why sometimes these Geekbench tests can be a little bit tricky in terms of you can't really, base performance overall just on the Geekbench scores. You actually have to use it and, figure it out for yourself. So this could just be an anomaly, and I will continue to run these and see if it gets back on track with beta 3. Now, when it comes to battery life is still terrible on beta 2. I mean, this is still an early beta for iOS 18, so I'm fully expecting battery life to be abysmal, and it absolutely is. So battery life is not great at all. I've noticed that there are two main battery hogs for me. Number one is sound recognition, so I completely turned that off now because it would drain my battery like crazy. And then number two is USB-C accessories. So take a look at this screenshot here. You can see USB accessories took up a lot of my battery life this day, and that was when I was just transferring files, ProRes files, from my phone to a USB-C SSD. So it wasn't very long. It was maybe like 20 minutes that I had that plugged in, or 30 minutes maybe, and it took up a ton of battery life. So there's just different things like that are definitely, issues with the beta, and just overall battery life has not been great for me on beta 2, but I do expect beta 3 to be a pretty decent improvement, since that will be when we get the first public beta as well. It's likely going to be the same build. So I would expect battery life to improve come next week or the following week. Okay, so let's talk about iOS 18 beta 3 and the public beta. So next week is the week of July 8th, and I would expect to see iOS 18 developer beta 3 next week, most likely on the 8th or the 9th. So Apple has released the first two betas on a Monday, but Apple typically releases betas on a Tuesday. So it seems like with beta 3, they might go back to being on track and their normal selves by releasing it on Tuesday the 9th. Now, if we go based off of the last 2 years, Apple has not released the public beta until 5 weeks after the first developer beta. So that would put us at the week after developer beta 3. So if that's the case, if Apple sticks to what they did with iOS 16 and iOS 17, it looks like we're going to have iOS 18 public beta on either July 15th or the week of July 15th, any day of the week after we get developer beta 3. Now, we could also see a re-release of developer beta 3 as well, just to get the same build number as the public beta. So that's what we can expect. We are going to see a couple of releases over the next couple of weeks. So that's exciting. Okay, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And let's start with Apple Intelligence and the potential for a paid subscription. So this report comes from Mark Gurman at Bloomberg, and he says that Apple eventually plans to turn some of its AI features into paid services, similar to iCloud Plus subscriptions. Apple Intelligence will be free to start, but Apple's long-term plan is to launch something like Apple Intelligence Plus with extra features that users pay monthly fees for, just like iCloud. And Apple is planning to get a cut of the subscription revenue from every AI partner that it brings on board. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because he said that it's expected that Apple will agree on a deal with Google and Anthropic to offer their AI services through its devices. And he says that Google's announcement is expected to come at the fall launch of Apple Intelligence. So it looks like this September, we are going to see Apple and Google officially announce their new collaboration with having Gemini on the iPhone as a potential model to use. And this is essentially where I think, this is going to be how Apple is going to monetize Apple Intelligence. So, for your basic everyday user, you're not going to care about switching between different models. But if you're more of a power user and you are willing to pay money, a monthly fee for Apple Intelligence, you're going to be able to choose between different models to perform different functions and, of course, get different results, because that is a different model. So I think that the majority of Apple Intelligence features are going to be free for life, but it's just going to be, if you want these extra features, you can pay for them if you would like to. Of course, there's probably going to be a lot more to it than that. We've not really heard anything at all. That is just speculation, but it's very interesting to see, and this looks like a great revenue driver for Apple long term. Also in this report, Gurman says that the Vision Pro will be getting Apple Intelligence, but not in 2024. So it looks like, this is going to be potentially marketed as a productivity machine from Apple, because we already know that Apple Intelligence only requires 8 gigs of RAM. The Vision Pro has 16 gigs of RAM at its lowest configuration. So Apple might start marketing the Vision Pro once it gets these AI features come 2025, 2026, whenever, as like a peak productivity device to get anything you want done quicker. Now, on the flip side, none of the HomePods are expected to get Apple Intelligence. And again, this really just comes down to a memory issue. It takes a lot of memory, for these models to be running on a device. And that's just simply not possible with the minimal amount of RAM in the current HomePods. And that is a perfect segue into the next product category that Apple is working on. So it says that, Apple is going to put the AI features on, quote, an entirely new robotic device with a display that includes Apple Intelligence at its core. Now that sounds a lot like the HomePod with a screen that we've been hearing rumors about for quite a while now. And just as you'd have it, we also got a leak this week that proves Apple is still working on the device and it might be out this year. So code was found on Apple's back end. So Mac Rumors found this and it confirmed that there's a device with the identifier Home Accessory 17,1. That is a whole new identifier category. And the 17,1 in the identifier name suggests that this could include Apple's A18 chip coming later this year. And this code also indicates that it could be running a software variant of tvOS, just like the current HomePods. So we've heard rumors and we've actually seen it in the code before that Apple is working on a Home OS software. So that could be what's running on this new HomePod with a robotic arm. So just think like the Amazon Echo Show. Think about something like that, but it's going to be Apple-fied. It's going to be like Apple's version of one of those Amazon Echoes that you always see in the kitchen. And speaking of the HomePod, if you still have the HomePod first generation, the OG HomePod, or the iPhone 10, Apple is now considering those as vintage. Now, if you don't remember, vintage is just when Apple stops distributing the products for sale more than 5 years, but less than 7 years ago. So between that 5 and 7 year gap is when products are considered vintage. They can still be fixed. They're not obsolete yet, but they are considered vintage by Apple. Okay, so let's get out of the past and move on to the future because we have to talk about some iPhone 16 rumors and news that we got this week. So it looks like the iPhone 16 is expected to be a major seller for Apple because it looks like Apple has upped its order of the next generation TSMC chips, the A18 chip, to 90 to 100 million units. So if we compare that last year for the iPhone 15 series, that number was 80 to 90 million as the initial chip order volume. So Apple is anticipating much higher demand for the 2024 iPhone lineup and the expense of 10 million units. They're expecting at least 10 million units more at the initial launch compared to last year. And I think this is all surrounding Apple Intelligence, and the next leak that we got this week basically confirms that because code that was discovered in Apple's backend, again from Mac Rumors, confirms that Apple plans to release 4 iPhone 16 models and they will all have the same A series chip. So the code includes the iPhone 16 identifiers as iPhone 17,1 through iPhone 17,5. Now all 5 of these identifiers start with the same number, which does suggest that Apple's going to use the same chip inside. Now, when I say the same chip, I mean that's going to be the same A18 chip at its core. We're still going to have a separate variant for the Pro model. So the Pro and Pro Max are likely going to have the A18 Pro chip, probably with just additional GPU cores and maybe more Apple Intelligence functionality and features, of course, camera features as well. But the big news here is that all the iPhone 16s are likely going to be able to run Apple Intelligence, which means that all of the iPhone 16s are going to have 8 gigabytes of RAM or potentially more for the Pro model. So that is great news. If you want Apple Intelligence, it looks like you will not have to go for the Pros like you do currently with the iPhone 15 lineup, because again, Apple Intelligence only works on the 15 Pro and Pro Max, but starting with the 16, it looks like it's going to be available on the base models as well, which is great. Now, we are expecting new AirPods later this year. However, we have some pretty interesting news regarding the 2026 AirPods, and this news comes from Ming-Chi Kuo. We saw an initial report on this from Bloomberg in February, but now Ming-Chi Kuo is corroborating this, and it looks like Apple is planning to begin mass production of new AirPods with camera camera modules by 2026. So Quo says the IR camera can detect environmental image changes, potentially enabling in-air gesture control to enhance human device interaction. And he says that the new AirPods are expected to be used with the Vision Pro and future Apple headsets to enhance the user experience of spatial audio and strengthen the spatial computing ecosystem. So those sound pretty compelling, especially for somebody like me who has a Vision Pro back there. So I can't wait to see what Apple does with the AirPods this year, and of course again in 2026. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. And this week the story comes from me. I had a crazy AirTag story. Okay, it's not super crazy, it's actually not crazy at all, but it's something pretty interesting that you might be able to learn something from. So I was going on a walk a few days ago, and deep into my walk, I was far away from the neighborhood, and I found a phone lying in the grass off to the side of the sidewalk, but not super close to the road. It was just sitting there face down. So I picked it up, and I was scrolling through. I was trying to see if there was any type of indicator of whose phone it was, an address, if they put it in lost mode, whatever the case may be, but there was nothing. So when I swiped up to see older notifications that were not just from today, you know, you can swipe up again to see older notifications, I saw a whole list of old notifications, and I could see the context, which helped me a lot because on the phone, it actually showed the left behind alerts for a backpack. So it said Ashley's backpack was left behind, and I saw an address, but I know from personal experience that sometimes the address is not accurate. So maybe they were at a friend's house, maybe they were at a school. Sometimes where you left something at is not necessarily the address where the person might live, where I would return this phone to. So then I kept scrolling, and I saw that address again multiple times. So I started seeing a pattern here of these left behind alerts from an AirTag that was in a backpack being left behind at the same location time and time again. So that told me, number one, that the phone belonged to Ashley, and number two, I had an exact address that I could walk to and return the phone to its owner. So sure enough, I went to return the phone to its owner. She was super thankful. It was a young high school girl, and she was super thankful that I found her phone. And the only way I was able to find, I even told her, was because of the left behind alerts from her backpack that she had the AirTag in that went to her iPhone to notify her. So that's crazy, and that's just another, it's not really that crazy, but it's just something cool that I wanted to share with you guys, and just another reason you should have an AirTag. I know that's a super niche scenario, but you never know. Something like that could happen to you, and if somebody knows what to look for, they can find it and potentially return your lost item to you based off of that. So just a fun little story that I thought you would enjoy, and if you enjoyed this video as a whole, I would appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. Also be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on next week's Apple Weekly episode. Again, I post these every single Saturday. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week.